Stay paranoid.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball, another season recap podcast today going solo, and we're going to be looking at the Los Angeles Lakers 2017-18 season. So Michael Bolton,
let's get to it.
What a wonderful idea that is. The Lakers team, it's a hard one to get a full handle on, just especially as we head into the future with this team, given how much could change. We know they've been priming themselves for this offseason with cap space and the specter of Paul George, or is it LeBron James, or are they trading for Kawhi Leonard, or is DeMarcus Cousins coming? Like, who knows? But there is opportunities for this team to be completely different by the time next season starts, probably more so than any other team in the NBA. So lots of things can change with the Lakers as we move forward. In terms of draft picks, they don't have their draft pick. This is the one all the way back from that Michael Carter-Williams Philadelphia 76ers deal, which was earlier traded to Phoenix as part of the Steve Nash deal. They were able to keep it for the last couple of years to get those number 2 picks, as it was top 3 protected. And this season, as they improved, they ended up giving away the number 10 pick to the Philadelphia 76ers. So as of next season, their first round draft choice is back, but it's unlikely to be a very high pick given their improvement, the potential improvement of the young guys again next season, and the specter of those big-time free agents coming in. They have one pick this season, and that is pick 47. At this point, obviously trades, and that could change, but unlikely to get impact guys. But the Lakers have had one of the best scouting departments recently, getting really strong players late. We just have to look to last season with Kyle Kuzma and Josh the Hitman Hart with those late picks coming in. Even guys like Thomas Bryant, Ivica Zubac, I think have still a lot of potential. They've done very, very well with the draft picks that they have had, especially those late ones, as their scouting department has been awesome. So they might be able to get themselves a steal with this pick 47. The big interest here is in free agency, and with all the guys they have as free agents, there's a ton of them. Whether they come back or not is going to be determined by a number of factors. We've got Isaiah Thomas, who came across in a mid-season trade. He's an unrestricted free agent. It feels really, really unlikely that he'll be back with this team. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope signed a 1-year deal. I think his presence on this team is going to be obviously dependent on other guys that they try to sign, and if they strike out with them. Channing Frye and other mid-season acquisitions, an unrestricted free agent. Brook Lopez, who was a trade guy last off-season in the D'Angelo Russell deal. He's an unrestricted free agent and didn't have his best season, so he could come back on a cheaper deal depending on how they're looking at the rest of free agency. And then they've got a bunch of restricted guys. The number 1 guy there being Julius Randle, who had a real breakout season in his 4th NBA year. Again, could be a casualty of free agency plans from the Lakers, and another team might be able to get him. And I think at a pretty decent price, given just the cap crunch in this market. Restricted free agents generally get dicked around quite a bit, and Randle might be a player who either takes a short-term deal to get back onto the market, or a team might be able to get at a really cheap price. Could easily be back in LA as well. Other restricted free agents, not all that important. Travis Ware, who was a late season addition. You got Andre Ingram, who played those 2 games at the end of the year. Unlikely he's going to be back. The mitten, Gary Payton II, is a restricted free agent, as is Alex Caruso. And then you've got a team option on Thomas Bryant, who I did detail in the 2017 draft recap series, and his G League numbers are really impressive. I'm sure they'll pick that up, but again, maybe not, depending on what they need in terms of cap space. Ivica Zubac and Tyler Ennis both have non-guaranteed deals. So we're talking about a massive, massive chunk of this roster that could all not be back. They could renounce all of these guys and get themselves close enough, or really close to that 2 max cap space slots, and change their team around significantly.
Pretty good. It's pretty good.
I did not mean to push that button at all, but we'll leave it in. The Lakers were 35-47 in 2017-18, which was actually 2 wins under their expected win-loss, so they could have been a little bit better. They did falter a little bit down the stretch, and a lot of that was injury-related. Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, Kyle Kuzma was battling an ankle problem down the stretch of the season, and they were having to play Alex Caruso and Tyler Ennis and Gary Payton minutes. As we said, Andre Ingram, Travis Weir, these guys were playing big minutes because of those injuries, and that ended up costing them probably a little bit of a better record because they weren't pushing for the playoffs at all. But clearly, this was a team that I'll admit that I was wrong on this. I was looking at really smashing the under in the Vegas over-unders. I think it was set at 33, and I thought, 30 is a reasonable expectation, but they went well above that at 35 and could have easily had a lot more than that. So, really impressive stuff from the Lakers this season. They were the number 2 team in pace this year. Luke Walton really starting to get some of that Warriors stuff happening, playing with a bunch of young guys as well, really getting that pace up. And some of that's part of the reason why Brook Lopez did struggle this season is he's not the most nimble of foot, and they were going small quite a bit and playing with a really quick tempo out there. Offensively, they had the 23rd best offense, but defensively, and this was one of the biggest surprises of this team this season, they were the 12th best defense overall. And I did not expect to see that happening. They got to the line at a pretty good rate. They shot decently. Turnover problems did plague them during the season. They didn't generate as many turnovers defensively as perhaps they would have liked, but defensively, really strong. Good rebounding rate, able to restrict the opposition. They had the 10th best defense in terms of effective field goal percentage against, so that's obviously an improvement over what we'd seen in the past from this Los Angeles team. But rebounded strong, 2nd most rebounds in the entire NBA, 7th most assists. Is a really strong number, but the 7th most assists gets tied in with 29th most turnovers. Of course, those things generally do tend to go hand in hand. In terms of leaders in some of the offensive or advanced numbers, the best offensive rating on the team was Josh the Hitman Hart, while the worst offensive rating was Lonzo Ball, and we'll talk about Lonzo quite a bit later. But the best defensive rating, Andrew Bogut, not that he played a huge amount, but again, unsurprisingly, of the players who finished up on this team, Lonzo Ball had the best defensive rating, and his defense was really, really spectacular as a rookie point guard. No one should be surprised that the worst defensive rating on this team went to Isaiah Thomas, as he is close to the worst defender in the league. In terms of the other stats, Julius Randle led the team in PER, win shares, true shooting, win shares per 48. Obviously some impressive numbers for him this season. Isaiah Thomas led the team in usage, didn't really do a huge amount to get us excited. Offensive box score plus minus, the 2 leaders on this team didn't end up on this team by the end of the year, Larry Nance and Jordy Clarkson. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope ended up being the leader there, while overall box score plus minus, Nance led the team there as well and didn't end up on the team at the end of the year, and that was Lonzo Ball, who was the sole remaining guy in first place at a BPM of 2.5, while KCP led the team in VORP, which is a combination of games played and box score plus minus. It's a cumulative stat, whereas box score plus minus is a rate-based statistic. Let's have a look at some of these guys and how they played. And we'll start with Lonzo. I did detail him quite a bit in part 1 of the 2017 draft recap. He played 52 games, 34 minutes, 10, 7, and 7, 1.7 threes and steals per game, 0.8 blocks, and they are all excellent numbers, and that made him the 59th ranked player this season. The thing that really dragged him down was 36% from the field, 45% from the line, 31% from 3. But we did see stretches of that shooting coming up, and if it gets to 40%, if it gets to 60% from the line, numbers which aren't unrealistic. He shot over 60% from the line in college. He shot 70% on 2-pointers in college. Never going to get to that, but he can shoot better. He shot 40% from 3 in college. So if we see 33% from 3, if we see 41% from the field, if we see 62% from the line, he jumps from the 59th ranked player to becoming the 30th ranked player, with potential to move into the top 20 just because of the rebounds, the assists, the steals, the blocks, and the threes. And if you go from 10 points to 13 points, which all that needs to do is change those percentages, and then if he actually gets better in terms of increased usage, that could be 15 points. And 15, 7, and 7, 2 threes, 2 steals, 1 block. It's an easy top 20 discussion. Now, of course, it does have to be balanced. Drafting guys up high with really low point scoring does really box you in, because we talk about it all the time. All of the top point scorers and I don't know why my emphasis on point scorers was really off there. All of the top points guys are concentrated in the top 50. You can find high rebounders and higher blocks and high steals and high assist guys in the 70s and the 80s and the 60s, but nearly all of the top scorers, nearly all of the top, say, 50 contributors in the points category are in the top 50 in overall fantasy ranks. And taking in your second pick or your third pick, a guy like Lonzo or a guy like Draymond, who's not scoring very much, means that you are well behind the 8 ball in that points category, and catching up can be difficult, and it might force you into a punt point situation. That also he's going to be a punt free throw guy. Is he a punt field goal guy? And that's the limitation with Lonzo. So while his overall metrics might come out to be top 20, does drafting him in top 20 or top 30 make sense for your team? And that's something that really does have to be paid attention to, and it's one of the reasons why I do tend to avoid Draymond a lot of the time unless I am punting points, because it does put you in such a hole. Then you end up chasing points, and it puts you behind in a lot of other categories. But Lonzo, as I said, impressive this season, especially defensively, was really able to influence the game on that end. A 2.5 defensive box score plus minus is obviously a really impressive number. He was a positive for the year on off as 1.2, which is a pretty strong number as well. But again, went into a lot of detail with him over on that draft recap show. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope was the 76th ranked player for the season. He played 74 games. Struggled early in the season when he was splitting his time between Staples Center and jail. 33 minutes, 13.5 points, 5 rebounds, 2 threes, 2 assists, 1.4 steals, 43, 79, and 38%. This was his best fantasy career or season of his career because he upped his rebounds. He was like a 3 rebound per game guy. He went to 5 this season. He got his steals up to an equal career high of 1.4, and his field goal percentage, even though 42.7 is not that good, it's the best number he's had in his career. And the 3-point percentage, also the best. So while people, and Lakers fans in particular, would be disappointed with KCP this season, and I'm sure they were, overall this was his best year and was able to be a fantasy contributor, adding those steals, adding those threes, being more efficient than he had been in the past. I have to think that on a 1-year deal, he did pretty much exactly what he needed to do for this team, and he's a solid. Okay, when you compare like shooting guards on the market, is he a better option than say Avery Bradley? Probably. Yeah, Bradley was terrible this season. Obviously dealt with groin issues, but how much of it was that, and how much of it was Bradley slipping? KCP was an above-average advanced stats guy, solid true shooting, good box score plus minus, good win share stuff. Like I thought he was pretty good this season, despite a lot of the negativity that was directed his way. And he's probably a guy that I would prefer over someone like an Avery Bradley. Julius Randle, let's talk about him. He was really impressive. I was down on Randle heading into this season. I was thinking, how are they going to manage the Brook Lopez, Larry Nance, Julius Randle, and then, of course, the future MVP, Kyle Kuzma front court. Randle had struggled at times. He had been out of control on offense. He can't shoot. His defense had been a continual problem, but he was able to be an absolute monster this year. 82 games, 27 minutes only. He was the 88th ranked player. He averaged 16 points per game, 8 rebounds, 2.6 assists, half a steal, half a block, 56, 72% shooting, only 22% from 3, and that's something that is a real concern. Now, a lot of those concerns that I had for Randle, they still exist. He's still not a good defender. He still cannot shoot for shit, but he was able to just be that strong and that aggressive offensively that it didn't really matter because he could get to the rim whenever he wanted. Massively strong win shares numbers from him, a PER of almost 20, excellent true shooting despite the piss poor 3-point shooting. Good box score plus minus from Randle as well. He was really, really impressive this season. Much more impressive than I thought he would be. On off doesn't paint him in quite as good a light, 0.4 positive, which is that's basically a neutral sort of number. But his numbers this year overall were really, really impressive, and still only played 27 per game. He was misused and he was pouting like a real dickhead at the start of the season, but really cranked it up at the end. And over the last 25 games, he played 32 minutes, averaged 19.5 points and 9.5 rebounds, 3 assists. But one thing that will always hold him back, and that made him the 58th ranked player, the fact that he gets 0.6 steals and 0.4 blocks, and even per 36 minutes, when you're only averaging 0.7 steals and blocks, that's a real negative in those areas. Free throws, he gets to the line quite a bit and is not that good at them. 72% this year, 72% last year, 72% the year before. And when you're taking 5 attempts per game, and over the last 25 games, he was taking 7 attempts per game, that's not ideal. It's not punting, but it's also one where you do have to take it into consideration that it is providing a negative in that category. His assist rate dropped this season with Lonzo Ball around. Not surprising. It also picked up at the end of the year when Lonzo was out, 3.2 assists over the last 25 games. But if he finds himself on a different team where he is able to run things a lot more offensively, say he's in Dallas and it's just him and Dennis Smith really is the only two guys who can move the ball because the pencil Harrison Barnes isn't going to do that, and I'd prefer Randle being that guy rather than, say, Wes Matthews. He could average 4.5, 5 assists per game. I think that's decent. 18 points, 9 rebounds, 4.5 assists. The defensive issues are still there, but those other numbers would elevate him to close to being a top 50 guy. And I think expecting a top 50 season out of him next season is absolutely realistic. Give him 31 minutes a night. If he's in a different situation, I can imagine that even being more likely. So super impressed with Randle. I'll admit that I was too down on him heading into the season. I probably got that wrong I did get that wrong on him. And there is potential here for him to move forward. The shooting's still a concern. The defense is still a concern. I don't think he's ever going to become a superstar. I think he can become a solid starter, or he already is pretty much a solid starter. But the defensive concerns, the shooting concerns, they do limit his upside. And I think that's something that we do need to pay attention to when talking about Julius Randle. Let's talk about the future MVP. Spoke about him again in the draft recap shows. Kyle Kuzma, he's 22 years of age, 77 games and 31 minutes, 16-6 with over 2 threes, 2 assists, and like Randle, piss poor defensive numbers. 0.6 steals, 0.4 blocks, 45, 71, and 37%, and his percentages dropped off a cliff. And this was something I harped on a lot about Kuzma last season when he shot 55% from 3 and 55% from the field through preseason and through the first couple of games of the season. I said, there's no way this is going to continue, and he was making me look stupid for the first 6 weeks, 7 weeks of the season. And then it happened. He dropped off. His defense is a massive concern. It's really, really poor. And he's a rookie, clear that will get better. He's not all that young. He is 22 years of age. He's like 6 months younger than what Julius Randle is. Offensively, he does his thing, but I'm not certain that he is a star caliber player, a star upside player, the 104th ranked guy this season. He has a lot of work to do defensively, and I'm not certain about Kuzma. I've said this before. People look at him and they go, yeah, we take him 3rd overall in this draft. And to me, that's nonsense. He is not that sort of a player. I don't want to say that someone who's a couple of months off being 23 years of age has hit their prime, because he hasn't. But could he average 18 points? Sure. Could he get to 8 rebounds? Sure. But the defensive issues are a real concern. The lack of ball movement with him can be a problem as well. And the efficiency, which one is it? Is it what we saw from him in his time in Utah? Is it what we saw from him in the last 3 months of this season? Or is it what we saw for his 6-week stretch to begin the year? I'll go with sample size and thinking he's not going to be this unbelievable elite type shooter, and he's more suited to a complementary type role than a starring role, and that's still useful. But I get the feeling that Kuzma's a guy who will be overdrafted next season, and that might mean you might be able to extract value out of him in a dynasty league. If someone values him as a top 60 guy or as a top 50 guy, I'd be seriously looking into that. Now, he could become that. He could very easily become that. He could become this 24-point-per-game scorer who gets 8 rebounds and 2.5 threes and shows some defensive improvement. I'm skeptical of it, and I think the odds would be against that. But it is an opportunity to try and see what you can get for a guy like Kuzma, who a lot of the time the hype definitely exceeds the level of actual production that he provides. So that is something I think you should be looking at. Another guy who was impressive this season is Brandon Ingram. His rookie season, and I don't exaggerate here, was one of the worst rookie seasons of all time. He was potentially the worst player in the NBA during his rookie year, but that wasn't the case this season. He bumped himself all the way up to be the 112th ranked fantasy player this year. He's still only 20 years of age, and we're talking 4 or 5 months before he turns 21. 34 minutes in his 59 games, 16, 5 and 4, 0.7 threes, 0.8 steals, 0.7 blocks, 47, 68, and 39%. And there are a few things that were really impressive about Ingram this season. He took his shooting percentage from 40 to 47. That is a huge leap. 29% from 3 to 39%. A big, big leap. The free throws are still a concern, and that's what makes me think, is the really good three-point shooting an anomaly? You're shooting 68% from the line and 39% from three. Those two things don't align. Normally, you're a 40% three-point shooter, you're an 80% free throw guy, and he's consistently shown that he can't hit his free throws. He struggled from three in high school. He hit them really highly at Duke. He struggled last year. He hit them at a high rate last year. I don't know where his three-point shooting is, but one thing that was really impressive with what Ingram did this season was the ball handling, playing him at point guard. He averaged 4 assists per game, and over the last stretch of the season, or his last 6 games, he averaged 5 assists per game and dealt with injuries at the end with concussions and groin issues, but still was able to handle the ball and dish those assists, and that was really impressive. And that does help offset his shooting somewhat as well. Can he be a top 50 player? Yeah, he can. The defensive improvement, he was solid defensive, but the defensive stats, 0.8 steals, 0.7 blocks are nice. You would want more steals, especially in 34 minutes. The blocks are nice for that position. The field goal percentage is nice. Lack of threes is the concern, and the assists are obviously impressive there as well, but that could be impacted. Paul George comes, LeBron comes. Where does Ingram fit into that position? Is he a big point guard? There is lots of things that he can do, and he did show that ability, but I'm still not 100% sold on this shooting improvement sticking, especially from three, and what happens with these assists. But he was obviously a really impressive guy for this team this season, put up some pretty strong numbers. Still, box score plus minus stuff doesn't paint him in a great light, negative 1.3, but again, at 20 years of age, in his second season, I give him a pass there. If they're still putting up negatives in their third and fourth year, that's the real concern to me. PER of 13.8, a below average true shooting. So there's still areas for him to improve, and you can tell that because he's not a top 100 player yet in fantasy. But I think a top 100, he's definitely going to be drafted in the top 100. Assuming that no one big ends up coming to this team. And the real key to unlocking what he can do is the ball handling, is those assists. Because if he's handling the ball more, I think the scoring can go up because he becomes more dangerous there, being able to fire off those passes and deliver. And if he can get to 1 to 1.2 steals, which we're a little bit of a distance away from, we're not there yet, and get close to a block a game, these are all potential outcomes for Ingram in the next 2 seasons, then we're talking about a bloke who can challenge the top 50. But there are still flaws in his game that we do need to pay attention to, but it was a clear triumph for him this season to improve his scoring, to improve his rebound rate, his assist rate, and efficiency. Just got to work on a couple of those other things to get him back into that area where he can become an elite guy. I'm not sure that he's there, or no, he's not there just yet, and there's still a little bit of distance to go, and I have a healthy dose of skepticism just on the shooting to see where that goes, but definitely trending in the correct direction. Brook Lopez, it was a disaster for him this year. 74 games, 23 minutes. He averaged 13 and 4 with 1.5 threes, 1.7 assists, 0.4 steals, and 1.3 blocks, shooting 47 and 70 with 35% from three. But the disaster really was the playing time. I thought he'd come in as this team's best player. Realistically, he was this team's best player to begin the year. Julius Randle overtook that mantle later in the season, but he barely played. He was getting 20 to 21 minutes a game. He saw himself benched in stretches and playing 16, 17 minutes per game, and he was visibly pissed. And then Larry Nance got traded, and we saw the minutes go up in March. 35, 32, 33, 26, 36, 33, 37, 30, 35, 32, 39 minutes. This is all in a stretch of time. We went, shit, here we go. It is Brook Lopez back in business. And then they wound him back at the end of the season. Of course, if they do strike out in free agency, I could see Lopez coming back on a cheaper deal, but I'm just not certain with Kuzma and Randle there, potentially. Will he be getting the 23 minutes a game he saw this season, or will he be going to 29 or 30 minutes like he was during that stretch where they were playing really good basketball and winning a lot of games, and he was key in that? If we have a look at what happened with his per 36 numbers this season, a lot of it is basically the same. Yeah, his scoring dipped from 25 points per 36 to 20 points per 36. But he also shot, inexplicably, 11% worse from the free throw line and got there half as often. That's a confidence thing, a confidence in hitting the free throws and confidence in getting to the line. And that's a big deal. Hitting them at 11% worse and attempting 3 shots per 36 fewer, that's accounting for 3 points right there, pretty much, or 2.5 points. His overall field goal percentage went from 47 to 46.5. That's not a big dip. The usage also fell in a hole, 29% down to 24%. That was key. But rebound rate, basically the same. 3-pointers per 36, the same. Assists, the same. Steals and blocks, legitimately exactly the same as what he did in Brooklyn on a per minute basis. The problem is he played 7 minutes fewer per game, and that free throw percentage dropped, and that caused him to tumble from being a perennial top 40 player to being a guy outside the top 100. Lopez has just turned 30 years of age, so at that elevated pace, can he get back to the 30 minutes? If I had to gamble one way or the other, I'd say no. I'd say he's probably never going to be a top 50 guy again. He can have stretches of top 50 play, but realistically, it is all dependent on playing time. It's all dependent on minutes, and which team he goes to is going to depend there. His advanced numbers were still pretty okay. PER of 16, win shares per 48 over 0.1, which is league average. Positive box score plus minus, positive VORP. So nothing there where you go, yeah, that's terrible, but it feels like the pace of the team did really bother him, and the negative on-off stuff, he was a negative 1.9, which is clearly not good. But he's at the crossroads, and his career and his role and his future in fantasy is clearly up in the balance at the moment. Let's talk about Isaiah Thomas. He was an absolute disaster this season. We'll talk about what he did over the course of the year and then his time in LA. He only played 32 games and 27 minutes. Still averaged 15 points, but that came on 37% shooting and 29% from 3. 2 rebounds, 5 assists, 0.5 steals, and it's a big departure from what he did last season. His points dropped by 10 points per 36, an extra 3 per game less per 36. Assists, rebounds the same, but his steal rate went from 1 down to 0.6, and his efficiency went from true shooting of 63 down to a true shooting of 51. And I mentioned a lot of this last season is that his true shooting on that usage was something that was unlikely to be able to continue. I didn't envisage this much of a drop-off, but a drop was clearly expected. Now, I also went on about Thomas and having this hip injury, and the fact that he never had surgery was nonsense. It was stupid. You can't recover from these injuries without surgery. I don't know who was advising him. I don't know what was happening. I had the exact same problem with my hip, and it wouldn't get better. It took 3 years, and then I had to have surgery, and I'm not an elite athlete, and this is me trying to sleep, trying to stand up at work, trying to do anything, and it was like, you know what, this asshole just won't get better. He can't get it better. And that's the sort of thing that Thomas was going through. Now, he has had his surgery, so that's good. But he's an unrestricted free agent. Who wants a 29-year-old guy with a potential long-term hip injury who offers 0 defensively, who is, let's be honest, acting like a little bit of a shit bloke in both Cleveland and LA, has an overinflated opinion of himself, calls out teammates, and can be a locker room disruptor? Who's going to pay? Look, he is not getting anywhere close to a max or 20 million. He might be a 1 year, $12 million guy to see what can happen, but then he's going to be 30. If I was him, I'm locking in a 3-4 year deal, because he's the sort of player that at the age of 31, he's playing in China. That's the potential I see here with Thomas. Now, Celtics fans, yeah, obviously massive fans of him. He's a guy that had 2 top 30 seasons in a row playing in Boston, putting up great numbers. But not young players, small players who play no defense, if something happens to anything with their athleticism and their burst offensively, they're cooked. And I do fear that could be the case here with Thomas. Now, in his 17 games with LA, he averaged 15.5 points. He shot the ball a little bit better, 33% from 3 as opposed to 25% as a member of the Cavs, and his field goal percentage went from 36 to 38, but they're not massive changes. The steal rate dropped, the assist rate went up. Nothing that was overly exciting where I go, yeah, it was just a Cleveland issue, playing with LeBron kills people, because his numbers in LA were still pretty piss poor. Negative 4.6 box score plus minus is atrocious, which is negative 4.2 defensively. That's bad. A PER of 12.8, basically the same as Cleveland. A true shooting of 52, really poor. But I think a large part of this is the hip injury. And if it is better, and it may or it may not be, then he could be better next year. But I still have my doubts, even after, again, not comparing myself to Isaiah Thomas, I'm taller. My hip still isn't 100%. It still gives me problems. It still does limit what I can do athletically to a degree. Nowhere near what it was before, but it does limit me. And someone who's 5'8", maybe that's even being generous, if you are 2% off your max athleticism, that really can impact you. And I think that could be a problem for Thomas moving forward. And I don't think we should be expecting him, no matter where he goes, to be a top 20 guy or a top 30 guy or a top 50 guy. And depending on the scenario, maybe a top 100 guy is out of the question as well, which is disappointing for this guy. But he also didn't necessarily endear himself to fans with the way that he acted through the majority of this season. So we'll see what that ends up happening to him for the coming year. Josh the Hitman Hart, spoke about him a lot in the rookie stuff. 63 games, 23 minutes, 8 and 4, 1.2 triples, 0.7 steals, 47 and 70. Extremely high rebounding rate for a guard. Definitely, to me, looks like a guy who can hold down starting spots. So if we are seeing Paul George come across and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope goes, I could see Josh Hart being the starting shooting guard on this team, getting you some decent rebounds, scoring at an efficient rate, and being a potential top 150 guy. He was 217th this season, but really started to kick on at the end of the year. And over his last 11 games, he was the 72nd ranked player in playing those 34 minutes per game. The 61% true shooting that he had in that time on only 17% usage helped. Really efficient stuff, but that was a key part of what he was able to do all season. He also averaged 7 boards, over 2 threes, and a steal per game with 2 assists. And I think he does have a couple of top 100 seasons in him at some point in his NBA career. The other guys on this team, Thomas Bryan, I'm not really going to get into him. I spoke about him a lot in the draft recap show, so you can go listen to that. Gary Payton, Travis Ware, Tyler Ennis, Alex Caruso. I don't think there's a huge amount to speak about with any of those guys. Channing Frye didn't do too much, and you get the feeling that his career is winding down, or he's more just going to be a 13th man and a contender that can occasionally come in and knock down threes. Luol Deng only played 1 game. He started the first game of the NBA season and didn't play again all season. He's clearly pissed with this organization, and he won't be back next season. He might still be on the roster. Maybe he's not going to be playing. The other guy we do need to touch on is Ivica Zubac, a guy whose numbers translated really well. He had a strong end to his first season, but was limited this year. And that was always going to happen with Brook Lopez coming in, with Julius Randle playing that backup role. Something I spoke about quite a bit with Zubac before the season is he was not going to be able to maintain that value this season. Expect a big dip from his first to his second year, but the potential for him to rise again in his third, depending on what happens with Brook Lopez. Now, I'm probably less confident of a rise happening in his third year, but he did provide some decent numbers down the stretch of the season as he's found himself back in the rotation. He had a double-double, he had a 14-9, a 16-5 from February onwards. Some okay performances, some decent shot blocking nights. Wasn't able to really get into big minute production. But over the last 25 games of the season on a per 36-minute basis, he was a top 100 guy, averaging 13.5 and 10.5 with 2.5 assists and 1.5 blocks. One thing that did happen with him this season is his free throw percentage jumped considerably from 65 to 77, but his field goal percentage went from 53 to 50. Overall, the true shooting did jump by a percentage point up to 56% on a limited usage. But I think he's a guy that, again, with the depends on what goes on here, he has a potential to find himself in a 18 to 20 minute role per game, or they could be just completely rolling the dice and go, well, we're going to play him 24 minutes. But I'm not sure that he's on a team that wants to push to the playoffs. I'm not sure he's going to be a high minute starting center. But I do see a better third season for him than what we saw last year, and possibly a better one than what we saw from him in his rookie season, because we've seen it again. When he gets the minutes, he is able to produce a high rebounding rate, can have some offensive moments, yes, can be efficient and was from the field and from the line. True shooting of 56 for the season. Passed the ball a lot better this season as well and blocked some shots. So there is some value in Zubac. It's all about where does he get that opportunity. And I think heading into his third season, he could push for a larger role. And that does give him a little bit more fantasy appeal than definitely what he had this year, which is something, again, that we did on this podcast anticipate heading into this season. I think that will wrap it up for the Lakers. Nobody wants a massive Tyler Ennis breakdown, I'm assuming. He's unlikely to be with this team next season. If you do like these podcasts, go and subscribe on Apple Podcasts and leave a 5-star rating and a review. You can also find us Google Play, TuneIn, Stitcher, and on Spotify, and of course on YouTube, where you should subscribe, you should leave a thumbs up, and you should leave a comment as well. Follow me on Twitter at redrock_bball. We are done here, guys. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Isaiah Thomas.